Yeah, she went first. All right, hello. What is your name? What's your role?
My name is Mrs. Urich, and I'm the Student Support Behavior Specialist at the middle school.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so we have a couple questions for you about students or people or even colleagues with anxiety.
Okay.
So the first question we have for you is, how do you know when like a student comes in, they sit down and they want advice on something, how do you know or like kind of like recognize that they might be dealing with anxiety?
A lot of times I know because a student will have fear about an event that hasn't happened yet, or they'll have an overwhelming feeling of fear without any ability to understand why that feeling of fear is there. So I would say unspecific fear, non-specific fear is one of the big ones. A lot of times too, when people are afraid that everybody hates them or doesn't like them, a lot of times that says to me too, maybe there might be some anxiety because they're worried about everybody else's perception of them.
I'm just not adding this question because it came to my beautiful brain while we were talking.
I'm ready.
Wait, I lost the question. How do you know the difference between a student with anxiety and a student with like panic attacks, and then just a student who thinks the whole world revolves around them?
That's a hard question. So panic and anxiety are very closely associated. So you can have anxiety with panic attacks. So panic attacks are more so a in the moment escalation, where anxiety is kind of a pervasive issue too. So usually you see more of like the difficulty breathing and everything like that with a panic attack rather than with just generalized anxiety. And then what was the last part of that question?
How do you compare those two things to a student who just thinks the world revolves around them, everyone's out to get them, and everything's about them all the time?
This is a tough pill to swallow, but sometimes people who feel that way, who might look like they think the world revolves around them, might be some of the people struggling the most with anxiety. And so I don't know if you always can separate them. I think sometimes that's the same thing. But if there's not really much fear involved, I would say that's the big piece. If somebody isn't afraid of anything or doesn't have any overwhelming feeling of fear, then it's probably not anxiety. Not for sure, but sometimes.
Our third question now for you is, what are some like big signs that you recognize right off the bat just talking to somebody that they do have anxiety? Like not might, like you just guaranteed know that they're dealing with something like that.
Well, since I'm in the middle school, fortunately, a lot of students that come in here and talk with me know that they have anxiety. So they're usually pretty much the first to report it. But another way I can usually tell is if they come in and they talk about some of the strategies they've tried before. So a lot of times people with anxiety will go through several strategies that they'll try to address, and they haven't worked for them. They haven't helped them to manage their anxiety. So then I know that they've put in some effort and it's kind of debilitating. So anxiety truly in its diagnostic form should have an impairment on the person's life. So if they're struggling to function in academics or at home or with their friends, then that's probably a good indicator there's some anxiety there too.
Okay, our last couple are kind of in similar sense of each other, but one of the last ones I should say is, what are some like coping strategies that you would give to people with anxiety who have tried many things but they feel like nothing's working?
One of the things that I think is most important is what I call like a body scan, and what that is I'm a really bad artist, so it never looks good when I do it, but I'll draw a stick figure, and I usually will help the person to understand like from head to toe, how do you sense anxiety is coming? So when you're angry or when you're upset or when you're anxious, whatever the feeling is, what do you feel in your head first? Do you have repetitive thoughts? Do you have a fixated thought? Are you getting headaches? When you are anxious, do you end up fidgeting with things? Are you shaky? Do you feel dizzy and lightheaded? So we'll go from head to toe and kind of look at how they know their body is anxious, and we'll talk about the first thing that happens and come up with some kind of strategy to kind of break that chain so the rest of those don't follow. Part of that is teaching self-advocacy too. Do you guys know what self-advocacy is? What does that mean to you?
Okay, well, to me, self-advocacy, oh my goodness.
It's a hard word to say.
I guess so. Is when you can advocate for yourself, like when you can say like, hey, I'm really struggling with something, and you're able to ask for help, you're not scared to.
Yeah, so being able to communicate what you need in that moment is in itself a skill. So if that's breaks, if that's to go get a drink of water, if that's to be able to talk to somebody you trust, to be able to communicate that to somebody else is one of the main things that I focus on, so that way they can stand up for themselves and get the support they need.
And our last question is just general advice that you give to somebody who doesn't exactly either know that they have it or they feel like they have it, but they don't exactly know what that means for them in their life. Like, what was something that you would say to them just to kind of put everything in perspective?
I think helping them understand, one, that anxiety is very, very, very common is helpful for students sometimes to know, not that it's okay to have it, but that other people are experiencing it too, I think can be helpful. But one of my big priorities here at the middle school is solutions focused. So I like to figure out, even if you don't identify it as anxiety, if something is bothering you, let's figure out what the source of it is so we can try to fix that problem instead of just dealing with the symptoms of what comes after. Thank you.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm just here if anyone needs anything.